there once the Prime Minister starts speaking, so stay tuned for that. But before we hear from the PM, let's hear from CBC's Megan Fitzpatrick, who's joining us now from Ottawa. She's following the story. Megan, I might have to jump in, cut you off if the PM starts speaking, but what are we expecting to hear from him?
Well, he's been in BC for a couple days now, Natasha, visiting various cities, including Nanaimo and Vancouver. And we know during his trip he met with BC Premier David Eby. And Eby is among the premiers that has been calling on Carney to make softwood lumber, an extremely important industry in British Columbia, more of a priority as part of the broader trade talks with the United States. Now, there have been long-standing disputes between Canada and the U.S. on softwood lumber, dating back decades, and the sector is facing countervailing duties as well as anti-dumping duties. These have been going on for years. Some of those duties just recently went up, and higher duties are on the way. I'm just keeping my eye on the Prime Minister.
Forgive me, I have to jump in. Well. Megan, thank you very much. We'll come back to you in just a moment, but now here's the Prime Minister. Let's listen.
For joining us, and let me thank Nick and the team here at Gorman Brothers for showing us around this incredible facility, but more importantly, giving us a window into the ecosystem that Gorman is part of. An ecosystem that spans this great province, that reaches out to customers in Canada, the United States, around the world, and provides tremendous value to those customers, and does so because it's built on values of this company. So it couldn't be more thrilled to be here on this important day for this industry. Now, before we begin, and as the sun beats down on my bald head, I'm reminded of the challenges, in all seriousness, the challenges that we're facing with the wildfires here in British Columbia and across Canada. And we've just seen recently fires down the road in the Okanagan. And I want to express our deep gratitude to the firefighters and the first responders who are on the front lines of combating these fires in the Okanagan, in British Columbia, and across our great country. And I also want to thank the Canadian Armed Forces because in support of those efforts, hundreds, thousands of Canadian Armed Forces personnel across Canada have been involved, including to evacuate thousands of people in danger. And we will continue to work closely with communities, the provinces, the territories, to protect lives and homes and businesses. Now, Steve's driven by here a couple hundred times. I've driven through here countless times. I can't count to 200 like Steve, but countless times as a kid, spending summer vacations in the Okanagan. This was always the highlight. But a lot has changed since then. There's a bit less fruit, less farming, more grapes, more golf, a myriad of new businesses sprouting up from aerospace to artificial intelligence and health sciences. But there are also a few constants. The good weather, the great people, and despite perils ranging from pine beetles to protectionism, the BC interior remains home to a world-leading softwood lumber industry. Yeah, because of these people. Yeah. And Gorman Brothers embodies the spirit of that industry and really the very best of Canada. Resilient, ambitious, dynamic. What began over 75 years ago with two brothers adapting from challenges in the orchards, building fruit boxes, has evolved into this thriving company with hundreds of highly skilled employees, and a company, as I said a moment ago, that supports an ecosystem that spans this province and builds the world. Canada was literally built with our forests and by workers such as those behind me. Indigenous peoples relied on our forests for their communities, for their transportation, for their artistic expression. Early settlers built our economy on lumber, literally built our economy on lumber, supplying the British Empire before shifting exports to a growing market in the United States. Each summer, thousands of university and college students help pay their tuition by planting trees. The forest industry is a pillar of the Canadian economy. It supports 200,000 jobs across the country, contributes more than $20 billion directly to our GDP. It's the economic backbone of nearly 300 rural, Indigenous, and northern communities, many of them right here in British Columbia. Aujourd'hui,
Today, Canada is the second largest softwood lumber producer. We supply 85% of U.S. imports and represent approximately 1/4 of the U.S. market. And this despite decades of trade threats coming from the other side of the border.
Over the course of the last 4 decades, the United States has alternated between confrontation and collaboration, frequently applying unfounded countervailing and anti-dumping duties against Canadian softwood, and then signing formal agreements that benefited businesses, workers, and homeowners on both sides of the border. Let's be clear. Canada does not dump lumber into the United States, and we will continue to make the case that these current and proposed duties are unjustified. Canada is a vital supplier to our southern neighbor. We represent around 1/4 of the U.S. market, and we help keep down costs of American homes while improving their quality. But we're in a situation now where the disputes around softwood lumber are part of a bigger picture. American trade pressures have intensified and broadened. And the U.S. is in the process of fundamentally changing all of its trading relationships. In a series of recent agreements, America is in effect charging for access to its economy through a combination of higher baseline tariffs, unilateral trade liberalization by its partners, and new commitments to invest in the United States. We understand that. Overall, Canada is in a strong position. Despite our size, Canada is already the second largest foreign investor in the United States. Many of our companies are essential to the complex supply chains that drive American competitiveness. And the commitment of the United States to the core of CUSMA, reaffirmed again last week, means that the average U.S. tariff rate on Canadian goods remains one of its lowest. And over 85% of Canada-U.S. trade continues to be tariff-free in both directions. To be clear, Canada remains committed to CUSMA for the stability and the prosperity it provides on both sides of the border, and will continue to engage in constructive trade negotiations with the United States in the pursuit of the best deal for both sides. And I'll be speaking more about how we can reinforce these commitments in short order. But despite our advantages, certain of our major Canadian industries are being severely impacted by U.S. trade. These strategic sectors include autos, steel, aluminum, copper, pharmaceuticals, semiconductors, and of course, softwood lumber. So while we'll continue to work with the United States on the many mutually beneficial opportunities that we share in trade and investment, it is clear that we cannot count or fully rely on what has been our most valued trading relationship for our prosperity. And that's why we're increasingly focused on building our strength at home and finding new opportunities for Canadian companies and workers abroad. Our government's new comprehensive industrial strategy will help our companies retool and reinvest to protect Canadian jobs, to build Canadian competitiveness, and to meet growing demands in Canada while developing international opportunities wherever free trade is a commitment, not a condition. 2 weeks ago, I announced the first of the elements of that new strategy with a series of measures to support the transition in the Canadian steel industry. And of course, today here, I'm going to focus on how we can help transform our softwood lumber industry to compete in this tough new environment. And it starts from recognizing that 2/3 of Canadian lumber production and nearly 90% of Canadian lumber exports currently go to the United States, leaving us disproportionately exposed to their trade actions. This dependence creates costly uncertainty. It weakens our industry's ability to weather downturns. It makes lumber more expensive for builders here at home, and it foregoes enormous opportunities in fast-growing markets around the world. So to turn challenge into opportunity, with Minister Hodgson, Secretary of State Fuhr, today I'm announcing a series of new measures to help the softwood lumber industry pivot to a growing Canadian market and to the markets of reliable trading partners around the world.
Today, I am announcing a series of new measures to help the softwood lumber industry to turn increasingly to a growing Canadian market and new, reliable trading partners around the world.
The first pillar is to give our companies that need liquidity, that liquidity in order to address immediate pressures. To do so, we'll provide up to $700 million in loan guarantees. This will ensure that forestry companies of all sizes have the competitive financing they need to maintain and restructure, if necessary, their operations during a period of profound transformation. Second, to make the softwood lumber industry more competitive for the long term, we will provide an additional $500 million, largely in grants and contributions to supercharge new product development and new market diversification. Products such as reinforced timber and low-carbon wood fiber-based insulation materials that are used in prefabricated and modular housing. These investments will increase domestic processing and value added, particularly as technology changes the way we build. This new funding will include initiatives to support Indigenous-led forestry business development and diversification, something that Gorman has stood behind for decades. Third, we will be our own best customer by relying more on Canadian lumber, Canadian softwood for Canadian projects. Canada's new government has a strong mandate to get big things built faster. That means millions of more homes, major new ports, new trade corridors, new energy projects. And as we build bigger and faster, we will build Canadian, prioritizing Canadian lumber, Canadian steel, Canadian aluminum in Canadian construction. Canada's new government is working to double the pace of new home building to almost 500,000 new units a year over the course of the next decade. That alone could double the use of Canadian softwood lumber in new residential construction, an increase of almost 2 billion board feet, and double the demand for structural panels, an increase of nearly 1 billion square feet. To help realize that potential, this fall, we will launch Build Canada Homes. Build Canada Homes will start by getting the government back in the business of building deeply affordable homes, and in the process, catalyze a new housing industry using Canadian technology, Canadian lumber, and Canadian workers. Core to Build Canada's Homes mandate will be to provide up to $25 billion in financing to innovative private sector home builders in Canada. For the deeply affordable homes that we finance and build, Build Canada Homes will catalyze bulk orders of off-site construction of prefabricated and modular homes, specifying the use of Canadian technologies and resources. This combination will create enormous sustained demand for Canadian lumber products. And it's just one example of the possibilities. Just a few hours drive from here in Castlegar, Kalsnikoff Mass Timber recently opened their 100,000 square foot mass timber prefabrication and modular facility, the first of its kind in North America. They're adding new products and services, including prefabricated wall panels, mass timber modules, and trusses designed and manufactured for construction efficiency. And of course, the impact of Build Canada homes can be and is being reinforced by provincial initiatives, including the modernization of building code regulations by British Columbia, Ontario, and Quebec. This creates significant additional demand, going forward, for Canadian softwood lumber. As an example, again, here in BC, the increase in the size of buildings that can be constructed using encapsulated mass timber from 12 to 18 stories.
There are enormous opportunities for the softwood lumber industry, and the investments we are making today will help that sector to take full advantage of those opportunities. As we build this country, we are changing the federal government procurement process in order to require that companies that have a contract with the federal government use Canadian lumber.
The fourth pillar is to launch new initiatives to deepen and diversify international markets for Canada's sustainably sourced forest products. These will include reinvigorated federal programs to market innovative, sustainable, high-quality wood products, such as in recent years, programs such as Canada Wood, which achieved many successes, including promoting wood-based construction to new segments in Asia. To build on this base, we'll promote the development of building codes in those countries and help to develop local building capacity with wood, combining them with sustained trade promotion for our products. In doing so, we'll emphasize that lumber is ecologically sound, and green building strategies can create transformative economic opportunities while addressing climate change. The prize is large. By the end of the decade, Canada could capture a significant share of up to $150 to $240 billion in the global bioeconomy market. And finally, no matter how hard we support and how hard we work to support and transform our industry, we know that in times of great change, there's likely to be some workforce adjustment. And that's why we're also launching a major new reskilling programs to ensure that hardworking people in this sector have the chance to apply their skills to new opportunities, including in that entirely new housing industry that I spoke to a moment ago. For the forest products sector alone, we will be providing $50 million in upskilling and reskilling investments, as well as support for over 6,500 lumber workers. To conclude, at this hinge moment in history, Canada is starting to shift from reliance to resilience. Together, we're going to write our own story rather than let others dictate theirs to us. We're building one Canadian economy out of 13. We're embarking on a series of nation-building projects. We're launching unprecedented investments in home building, and we are diversifying our trade partners. Throughout, we will build Canada strong with Canadian workers, Canadian technology, Canadian lumber, and Canadian values. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister. In an effort to get to most of our journalists on the line here, we'll do one question, no follow-up. So we'll do about 15 minutes of questions. Première question. First question.
Good morning, almost good afternoon, Prime Minister Carney.
Thank you.
My name is Claudia Van Amerk. I'm with Global News. My question for you is that the Trump administration has increased the general tariff rate as well as double tariffs on steel and aluminum, yet your government has not retaliated. How do you justify it to Canadians who have voted you in to be elbows up against Trump that your government has not fired back, that you have not retaliated? Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the question. I think the first thing to recognize is, and I said this in my remarks, but I'm going to repeat for emphasis, which is that 85% of the trade between Canada and the United States is tariff-free. That's our exports to the United States, that's U.S. exports to Canada. And we recognize that. We recognize very much the United States reaffirmation of this core element of CUSMA, or what they would call USMCA. So it's important to preserve that. It's important to reinforce that. And part of our discussions is about that. We are also very cognizant that in about 9 months from now, the first review of USMCA, CUSMA as we call it, will begin between the three parties. So there's a bigger picture there. The third thing, just from context, is we have always said that we will apply tariffs where they had the maximum impact in the United States and a minimum impact in Canada. And so we don't automatically adjust. We look at what we can do for our industry that's most effective. In some cases, that will be to remove tariffs. We have removed some tariffs over time so that, for example, the auto industry can function more effectively. And we'll look at opportunities to do so, because in the end, we're looking at having the best impact in Canada. The last point, if I may, which is what today is very much about, is we're focused on a positive agenda of building forward for our major industries, those most affected. The softwood lumber industry, clearly, steel, aluminum, other industries as well. And that agenda starts at home, being our own best customer. It goes to big investments in improving our competitiveness, upskilling, helping our workers improve their skills, and it's also diversifying trade, and that's where we're focused. Thank you.
Merci. Prochaine question. On va prendre la prochaine question. Merci.
Prochaine question.
En français, si vous pouviez répéter la réponse en français.
Could you repeat the answer in French? Is that your
Je vais
question?
la pose en français. Mathis
français.
Hervé, Radio-Canada. Plusieurs premiers ministres vous ont
A
demandé de
number of
hausser le ton, de
premiers
faire preuve
have
de plus de
asked you
fermeté
to
pour répondre
show
à
a more determined
l'administration
tone
Trump.
in
Pourquoi
relation
ne
to
pas
the
déjà
U.S.
avoir annoncé de
administration.
contre-tarifs
Why
pour,
did you not already
d'accord.
announce counter tariffs
Merci pour
against the
votre,
U.S.?
Merci pour votre question.
Thank you for your question.
Alors, nous sommes dans la situation actuelle.
The current
et que le
situation
Canada
is that
dans
Canada
la meilleure position à ce
is in the
moment-ci
best
en ce qui
position
concerne
at this point
les tarifs,
in relation to
American.
U.S. tariffs.
c'est-à-dire que
In other words,
85% des
85%
exportations canadiennes
of Canadian
États-Unis
exports to the United States
n'ont aucune tarif
are
américaine.
not subject
C'est
to
la
any
même pour
U.S.
les
tariff.
Américains
And
par
it's
rapport
the
au
same
Canada.
for
Alors,
the
nous
United
sommes dans une
States.
position
So,
d'égalité
as I
à
say,
ce
we
moment-ci.
are in a
Deuxièmement,
position of
nous
equality
sommes en train d'une
between the two
négociation,
countries.
avec
Now,
les
at this
Américains
point, we
qui
are
concerne
continuing negotiations
surtout
with the United
les
States,
secteurs stratégiques,
particularly
le
in
bois de
relation to
l'acier,
strategic
l'aluminium, les
sectors
automobiles,
such
la cuivre,
as
puis
copper,
les
steel,
les
aluminum,
pharmaceuticals et les
pharmaceuticals, semiconductors, and softwood lumber. That is the current situation.
Nous mettons l'accent
And we
dans
are
une manière positive de
now
bâtir
focusing
nos
on
industries stratégiques,
what we can do
y compris,
positively
évidemment,
to build
le
our
secteur de
industries
bois
here in Canada, including in the softwood lumber sector.
Hi, good morning or good afternoon. Thank you for taking my question. Wolf Deppner, Canadian Press. Prime Minister, I'm still used to my old gig. Prime Minister, a number of premiers just put out a letter calling on your government to make the softwood lumber agreement a high priority. You probably saw that letter. This government here in British Columbia has asked repeatedly to treat the softwood lumber industry the way the Ontario auto industry is to be treated. What assurances can you give British Columbians and their government that your government won't sacrifice the softwood lumber industry on behalf of some sort of a trade deal that would protect the auto industry in Woodbridge, Ontario?
Thank you. Well, first off, thank you for the question. I did see the letter. I read the letter. I've read it several times. I've had direct discussions with the premiers on that issue. issue, including a long discussion with Premier Eby on the weekend, Sunday on the weekend. And just to underscore that discussion, it's Sunday on a long weekend. Even premiers deserve a holiday. He was on his holiday and he came in to have that discussion, underscoring the importance of this industry and the importance of doing everything we can to resolve the situation. We have consistently raised the issue with our American counterparts. It's one of the elements that adds to the complexities of the negotiations we're having with them, because those who follow the trade actions over the years, and they have been over the years, decades in softwood lumber, they are distinct but related to what the U.S. has been doing recently. These are trade actions under countervailing duties, anti-dumping. They're trade actions that Canada has challenged in court, various dispute panels, others. We win those challenges in general, and we will continue those challenges because we are not dumping softwood lumber. I would add, just for context, is that the President of the United States has signaled that there will be a 232, a strategic trade action, possibly with respect to softwood lumber as well. That brings it more into those broader discussions. So to be clear, we're not sacrificing any industry. We're working for the best deals for all our industries. And part, to bring it back to today, of getting the best deal not just in the trade discussions with the United States, but for what really matters. The people behind me and who they represent, the workers in the industry, the businesses, the ones we can't see, the indigenous communities that are active in the industry, all Canadians. Part of getting the best deal for them is to build the industry, is to innovate, to develop new markets, and be our own best customer. And that's what those aren't just words, we're putting behind those words $1.25 billion today of support in very specific ways to translate that into action. Thank you.
Next question, CBC.
Hi, Prime Minister Carney. Brady Strachan, CBC Kelowna. Have you spoken to Donald Trump in recent days, and will you retaliate with more counter tariffs, including on American steel, or countermeasures or lift countermeasures already in place?
Thank you for the question. I haven't spoken to the president in recent days. We'll speak when it makes sense. With respect to steel specifically, we announced a comprehensive approach on steel 2 weeks ago, which included significant support for repositioning, significant support for Buy Canadian, and with respect to, if I can draw some distinctions, with respect to softwood lumber, obviously the core of the demand domestically, not all of it, but the core of the demand, or much of the increase in demand, can be through our new approach to home building in this country. With steel, the defense procurement comes into play. The broader infrastructure investments is part of our building national projects of national significance and the requirements we'll have around those. So we had those elements there, plus some industry repositioning. So we feel, look, it's a challenging position. We have put in place a series of measures, and I would add one other thing, which I think is it's relevant. I know it's relevant for Canada, but I would submit that it's very relevant for the United States. We've also put in place the toughest measures against foreign steel that could be dumped into Canada or transshipped through Canada to other markets. So again, I just wrap that into the broader discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question, please. We'll go to Kelowna Courier. Thank you.
En français, si nous avons, en ce qui concerne le secteur de l'acier,
with respect to the steel industry, we have already implemented a number of measures some 2 weeks ago, including support subsidies with respect to investments made here in Canada, and changes to the federal government procurement system as well, particularly as relates to nation-building projects. We have also introduced protections against other countries who are dumping their products here in Canada
d'autres marchés.
Next question,
Okay.
Kelowna Courier.
Barb Aguirre, Kelowna Courier. Do you feel the U.S. under the Trump administration would honor any trade agreement that Canada could negotiate, seeing that they're a perceived unreliable trade partner?
I think this, when you're in a negotiation like this, and it's a very fluid one, you're looking for real win-win opportunities that make an agreement reinforcing. First, that's the first point. So, looking at those areas where the U.S., the president personally puts a very high emphasis on. So the president cares deeply about cross-border flow of fentanyl, ending the scourge of fentanyl. So do we. We are in the process of cracking down on fentanyl. We got 1,000 more RCMP personnel coming on board. We have 1,000 more border agents. We've got better surveillance technology. We're cracking down on transnational gangs. We're doing all those things first and foremost for Canada, but actually it helps solve the issues with the United States, issues which, to be absolutely transparent, Canada is a rounding error for relative to other sources of fentanyl into that country. But that's an example where we will continue to do things in a win-win way. In the sector, in the steel sector, in the auto sector, we firmly believe, and the auto companies would absolutely reinforce this, is we are essential to the competitiveness of the American auto sector. How do we reinforce that? That's part of what we're talking about. Last point, and there's many others to make, but, and I reference this in my remark, you see these countries making commitments for investments in the United States. Canada is the second largest investor in the United States today, in the world. We have 40 million people. We are the second largest investor in the United States in the world. And that puts in context the state of the relationship, the future potential with an agreement, and some, I'm not saying all of that, but without an agreement, there will be less, by definition.
Thank you. Next question, Kelowna Now.
Good morning, Steve McNall from Kelowna Now. It was referenced here earlier today, the Peachland wildfire.
Yeah.
And it brought crystal clear again to local media how we disseminate information quickly and effectively. Bill C-18 stands in our way to get back onto Facebook and Instagram. Are the Liberals looking for an alternative or rescinding that so that we can get that news back on those important platforms?
I'll say this, Steve. Thank you for the question. First thing, and one of the things that we have done, and I'll answer your specific question, but let me make a point on something we have done, which is, and you may not like this part of the answer, but I'm going to give it to you, which is that one of the roles of CBC Radio Canada is to provide unbiased, immediate local information, particularly in terms of in situations such as you're referring to, and that's one of the reasons why we've made the commitment to invest and reinforce and actually change the governance of CBC Radio Can to ensure that they are providing those essential services. Now, to your specific question, I personally, and this government is a big believer in the value of what you do. I'm going to use you as a representation in local news, and the importance of ensuring that that is disseminated as widely and as quickly as possible. So we will look for all avenues to do that, and I understand your question, and it's part of our thinking around that. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to the last question. Castanet, dernière question.
Thank you. Cindy White from Castanet. You talked about acting as one instead of 13. Alberta, the ad valorem tax that they slapped on our wine and other imports. What are you doing about that, and how do you pull people into line? You can't act as one if you have a breakaway province.
Well, let me say a couple of things. First, with respect to the wine industry in British Columbia, one of the most remarkable transformations over the course of the 50 years that I've been coming here, the level of innovation, the quality, the competition, the ideas, the hospitality, all of that is remarkable. Every Canadian deserves to benefit from the innovation here, just as people in British Columbia deserve to benefit from the Niagara, or Nova Scotia or Quebec or any of the other provinces where wine is produced. And I think this is actually one of the tests of some of the provincial, because your question goes to provincial barriers and frictions. There have been, to their credit, a series of provincial agreements or MOUs, memorandums of understanding, intentions, statement of intent to free up trade between the provinces. The federal government has taken a number of actions. We've legislated to remove all our barriers. And as First Ministers, Prime Minister, and the Premiers, we need to work together to translate those commitments into action so that tangible things, such as wine, is moving friction-free across the borders, and so that many other elements of our economy that are less tangible and won't make the headlines are doing as well. And finally, but it starts with this, so that people can move freely across borders and practice their professions without requalifying. So it's a top priority. I appreciate the question. It's part of a bigger picture, and we're gonna keep focused on it.
Thank you so much. This puts an end to our press conference. C'est ce qui met fin à notre conférence de presse.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you.
All right, everyone, if you're just joining us here on CBC News Network, we've been taking you live to West Kelowna, British Columbia, and you've been listening to the Prime Minister make a major announcement in terms of managing the U.S. tariffs against Canadian softwood lumber industry. He made a number of initiatives more plain and clear. Now, some of the key things are, in the short term, he's hoping to support the industry with $700 million worth of loan guarantees just to get these industries continuing off the ground while they're dealing with the immediate changes of the tariffs coming from the United States on any softwood lumber products going there. And then he says in the long term, he's investing about $500 million to supercharge towards new products and also to diversify the market. So let's get further detail from CBC's Megan Fitzpatrick, who's been listening alongside. She's joining us once again from Ottawa. Megan, what stood out for you?
Yeah, so a lot of money being offered there, Natasha, a couple different ways. So you just recap there sort of the $700 million promise in loan guarantees, $500 million in grants to, quote, supercharge businesses within this sector. And that will help them, Carney says, with their product development and their market diversification. As we know, and we heard him say in his remarks there, and that was one line that stood out. He said that it's clear we can't count on or fully rely on what has been our most valued trading relationship, that being the one with the United States. And Canada very focused on trying to diversify its market. So part of this package of measures is to help the softwood lumber industry, the forestry industry, more generally access more markets, but also to help generate more business for this sector domestically as well. So we heard him talking about that program there called Build Canada Homes. This is something that he promised during the federal election campaign, and he said in his remarks that they plan on launching that entity this fall. That's a little new detail there in terms of the timing, but he says that program will help create enormous demand, he said, for Canadian lumber as part of all these construction projects that the government's going to help spur here at home. So these major nation building projects as well as home construction as well. But some money too, we should note, for reskilling programs. So we did hear the Prime Minister acknowledge there. He said no matter how hard we try, there might still be some job losses in this sector. And so they are dedicating some funding to upskilling and reskilling training programs for upwards of 6,000 forestry workers who might lose their job. Hopefully it doesn't come to that, but this is a similar program that the government's also announced for steel workers as well. And we heard him reference some of those measures that he announced 2 weeks ago in Hamilton, Ontario, known as Steel Town, to support that industry as well. But let's just highlight a couple of things he said in terms of the trade negotiations with the United States. So not surprising, one of the questions to him was, have you spoken to Donald Trump? Because we did hear Trump mention on, I think it was Thursday, he said that he called, referring to Carney, but they didn't connect by phone ahead of that deadline. And then, as we heard the president announce, those tariffs going up to 35% from 25%. He said he has not spoken to Trump in recent days and, quote, we will speak when it makes sense. So interesting. Not sure when that time will be and when it makes sense for the two leaders to speak. But he did say Canada is continuing to negotiate with the United States in pursuit of the best deal for both sides. He did mention that softwood lumber has been raised many times, he said, during talks with the U.S., and he said it's adding to the complexity of these trade talks, because the softwood lumber industry, we're not just talking about tariffs, we're talking about these anti-dumping and countervailing duties that have been imposed for years on the industry. And so they're sort of trying to deal with those and try to deal with tariffs. And premiers like David Eby from BC have been urging the federal government to sort of join these talks together, trying to end the ongoing softwood lumber dispute with the U.S. while ending the trade war and tariff war with the U.S. as well. Some of these premiers had written a letter to Prime Minister Mark Carney last week asking him to make softwood lumber more of a priority. And so it was in answer to a question about that letter where he said, yes, we have raised softwood lumber with the Americans many times. And it sounded like that is why, one of the reasons that the talks have been so tricky with the Americans. Just lastly, I want to mention the questions and answers about retaliatory tariffs. Carney has been under some pressure by at least one premier, Ontario's Doug Ford, to increase counter tariffs, particularly on steel, because the steel industry is now under a 50% tariff. And Doug Ford has called for Canada to fight back with 50% tariffs on U.S. steel, and Canada has not done that. And so Carney asked about retaliatory measures beyond what Canada has already imposed. And Carney noting there, Natasha, that he says 85% of trade between Canada and the U.S. right now is still tariff-free, thanks to that carve-out and that exemption for goods that are compliant with CUSMA. But he said that Canada was always going to respond with tariffs where they would have the most impact or the best impact for certain industries. And then he was talking about these packages of measures to support the steel industry and now the forestry sector as well. It sounds like that's more of the direction that the federal government's going in. He did not say, yes, we intend to fight back with more tariffs. If anything, Canada might take off more tariffs that it has imposed. So people that are looking for Canada to fight back with retaliatory tariffs like Doug Ford didn't sound to me like the Prime Minister is too keen to take that approach. So those are a couple of the highlights there from that announcement and some of the questions and answers. But again, in terms of the sector and what it was looking for in terms of support, we'll watch for reaction if what Carney has announced today goes far enough, if it hits the mark in terms of the support that the sector is looking for as it continues to fight against these countervailing and anti-dumping duties, which just recently went up, and there's perhaps more to come in the weeks ahead, which the industry is bracing for. Natasha.
CBC's Megan Fitzpatrick in Ottawa. Thank you, Megan.